Right, great. Thank you guys for joining us, both in the audience and obviously our guests. Recently, you might have noticed we've been doing AMAs with different people. I think everyone is pretty used to hearing from Hein, who is listening, and from Emma. And we've wanted to kind of open the floor up a little bit so that more people get to share what they're working on, and so that the community gets to hear from more people and a different perspective than Hein and Emma might have. So today, we have Luca and Ryan, who are part of our business development team. They do pretty different things. Ryan is much more, I think, kind of institutional and deals with like the big guys who, before you can retweet something, it needs to go through like 10 lawyers. And Luca works much more on the kind of developer, more crypto focused kind of things. So it's quite cool that we have such I guess, a range within the team, which is obviously necessary. And that's what we're going to discuss today. So a bit more about the kind of institutional things, how long it takes, what kind of things we would expect to see once everything is kind of up and running. And then a bit more from Luca as well on the kind of more crypto developers, onboarding, like all of that kind of stuff. So that's where we're going. I've had one question that I've added that was submitted by the community. If you have any questions, you can leave them in this chat, like the community stage, and we'll get to as many as we can towards the end. But just keep in mind that this is business development people. So if your question is about, I don't know, something very technical, they're probably not the people to ask. So just try and keep the questions as on topic as we can. So that is my preamble. And now that it is out of the way, let's start with some introductions. So Ryan is our head of business development. Luca is our developer relations lead. And would you guys just introduce yourselves a little bit to the community so they know who you are, your background, what you do at Dusk?
Yeah, absolutely. Should I start?
Yeah, as the boss, why not?
Good point. Okay. Yeah. Hi. So, hi everyone. I'm Ryan King. Some of you have come across me before, of course. Talk about my background. So, I started out more on the mobile apps side of technology. When I entered the technology field, I was in EdTech back then. I had a corporate training app. Went through a couple of accelerators, startup accelerators, and then ended up gradually, slowly moving from being in the accelerator to running accelerators. So I first got into the blockchain space when I was running a blockchain accelerator for a major project. I then went on to run a couple of artificial intelligence accelerators as well, and then was sort of happily retired and teaching international business at a university before Dusk came and dragged me out of retirement for, quote, one last job. So here I am. And as head of business development, what I do is I run the department. So obviously the usual boring stuff of running a department, organizing what people do and when they do it and schedules and so on and so forth. But also more interesting stuff like taking care of the DLT TSS application, which I think we have a lot of stuff to talk about today. It's a big, long, complicated legal document. I spend a lot of my day reading legal documents or editing legal documents and talking with lawyers and talking with corporate partners and doing the top level meetings and things like that. So basically anything related to business development goes through me. I think that would be the easiest way of saying it. So anything to do with licenses or structures or infrastructure that we need in order to do business, and then the actual business that happens within that framework.
Awesome, thank you. And Luca, would you be able to give a bit of an intro?
Yeah, for sure. So, hi everyone, I'm Luca, and I'm doing developer relations here at Dusk. So, I joined the blockchain space, or however you want to call it, around 2018. So, yeah, first joined Hyperloop transportation technologies to work for on a self-sovereign identity solution based on blockchain. Then I got on an internship in the Barcelona Supercomputing Center to work on some research on Ethereum 2 clients. And then I started my journey in developer relations, joining several projects. And so yeah, that's and I'm finally happy to be here at Dusk, making sure that yeah, I can contribute to to enhance the developer experience of people building on Dusk. So here, my main focus is making sure that the voices of developers and partners that are looking to use Dusk are actually heard. So I usually work closely with both the business development team and the engineering teams, just to make sure that every request is triaged and we can highlight what are the needs of the technical community, plus being kind of the point of contact for other queries regarding integrations and the other technical partners. And in general, I've been working on the docs. So I'm really happy to hear any feedback from the community about also things we could improve from both a documentation perspective and also a developer experience perspective. So yeah, that's me.
Great, thank you guys. And then to get into some of the questions, Ryan, you touched on this, but can you share more about the DLT application that you're working on? Because, I mean, we spoke about it and you were saying that people probably think it's just a very long application form. And I was kind of like, yeah, they do, me. And you were like, it's a bit more complicated than that. So would you share a bit more about what this license means, what the process for it is, and kind of why it's such a big deal, why it isn't just like filling out a boring form? It's a bit more to it than that.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, let me go into. I think we will find the theme in what this short lecture, let's put it that way, that I'm about to give. The theme in this here is that the terminology is confusing, right? That's the main theme running through. It's a lot of the words that are used in this don't mean the same things as we would normally associate them with meaning. So let me break it down. I'm gonna make it break it down into four sort of chunks. The first chunk is, what does this even mean when we say the DLT license? So actually, it's better to call it a DLT exemption. So as people, the background for people who are not familiar is that we have this piece of European legislation called the EU DLT pilot regime. And what it allows is that financial institutions in the EU can operate DLT-based market infrastructure. So, for example, a DLT-based MTF, which is a multilateral trading facility, effectively a stock exchange, or a DLT-based CSD, a central securities depository, or a combination of the two. This is what you're allowed to build. So what does it mean that, like with most financial market infrastructure, you need to get a license to operate it. So it's often referred to as a DLT license. However, it's not really a license. The license is your MTF license or your CSD license that the organization has already got. Then you apply for the DLTR on top of that. So it might be better to think of it not as a license, but as an add-on. So that's the first thing to mention is straight away, is that you're not strictly speaking applying for a license. And it's important that we clarify that, because licenses, I mean, all of this takes a long time, but licenses take an unbelievable amount of time. We're not applying for a license. So let me be clear about that straight away. This is MPEX, of course, our partners who are applying for this. They already have the license. The license is the MTF license. Now what we're doing is assisting them in applying for the DLT exemption to that license. Okay, that's part number one. I hope that helps to clarify, firstly, those two words. The second part is, what does exemption mean? So exemption is often misinterpreted in the media. The mainstream media talks about exemptions, the DLT exemption, as being like an exchange has a right to not follow a rule. So for example, if the technology gets in the way of something, let's imagine reversed transactions. And we know it's very hard to reverse transactions, nay, impossible in a blockchain system. So then let's say the license required you to reverse transactions, then you get this exemption and it says, you know what, it's fine. You don't need to reverse transactions because technologically you can't. But again, that's a very bad interpretation of what's really going on here. I would like to put it in the following phrase, is that exemptions are really more to do with the concept of means versus end. So when you have your license, which NPEX does, they are informed what they need to do, but also how they need to do it. So the means and the end. And what the exemption is about doing is proving to the regulators that you can still do the same thing, the same end, but you have an alternative way of doing it. And that might be because that you can't do it, like in the example I gave before, or it might be because you have a more efficient way of doing it. So let's talk about transaction reporting, for example. Now, an MTF is required to hand over transaction reports no later than the end of a business day, reporting on what they've done. But why do that if you can provide the regulators with a view key that they can tap into and have a look at the transactions? It seems redundant to send transaction reporting when you don't have to. So that's an example of something where we can say, look, we can provide the regulators with the same end, which is the ability to see these transactions, but a different way, a different means. Like you have a view key, you can look at them when you like. So that would be the second part. And I'm almost done. I promise. It's not going to go on forever. Final part. What does it mean to say application? So, as you well mentioned in the introduction, the application sounds like it's a giant form you fill in, like when you go into college, when you're trying to get a grant, or you're trying to join an exclusive club, and they say, give us your personal statement and why do you want this application, etc., etc. Again, this is not really what the application is. What the application is for the DLTR, the DLT-TSS, is it says, for example, can you show us where in your documentation you are handling this issue of transaction reporting? Like, what are you changing? And show us the rules that you've written, the structures that you've written that ensure that we will still get the information that we want. And you basically say, yeah, it's in this document, page 3, paragraph 2, subsection 5. That's what the application is. What does that mean for this? It means that the implication then is we have to, or rather specifically, MPEX has to completely rewrite their documentation, like not all of it, but certainly large parts of it, because then the application is just pointing people to where these changes have been made in the additional regulation. That's something that we're helping them with at the moment. This means then that the actual submission of the application is more of a formality, a final step, which is quite straightforward. It's just a list of where we're pointing to, where these things are handled in the existing documentation. The real work is making the changes to the policies and the procedures. And anybody who's out there who's written anything of substantial length, whether it's a thesis or a dissertation for university or a play, a novel, you know that if you make changes upstream, this then has echoes all the way downstream. So changing one policy all the way over here can then have an effect and create a redundancy on another policy all the way over there. So this is a big, long, complex process that has to be done. And then the application itself is actually quite easy by comparison because it's just pointing the regulators to where this information is. So I hope that clears it up a little bit about what we're doing. I think the simplest summary would be is that we are providing alternative ways for MPEX to hand over the required information or do the required things that the regulators require under their current license by using DLT. And we're rewriting the policies and procedures of MPEX in certain ways so that we can easily show to the regulators that this has been thought through and this is on the books and this is all working and it all works together.
Thank you. And not to put you on the spot, but is there a time, like, do we know how long that takes, or is it it's kind of how long is a piece of string until the government says, like, you can go? And I know that people will probably be thinking, like, yes, but when?
Yeah, it's a good question. There's still work to do on the rewriting of the policies. There's still quite a bit of work to do. But we believe we can get that done in a reasonable amount of time. The question mark, of course, is how long the regulators take to review it. And that's why it's a question that is largely impossible to answer. I know people out there have probably heard maybe about other applicants that have been applying for this, and they've heard someone say, oh, it was 2 years of questions or more than that. But almost everybody except for us is not just applying for this is why I explained this earlier. They're not just applying for the exemption to add on to an MTF, but they're applying for the MTF as well. And that's the long thing that I mentioned. An actual MTF application takes a very, very long time. We're just applying for that extra add-on. So we're really hoping that we can put this together in such a comprehensive way that the government just has 1 or 2 clarifications and largely signs it off. But it's very much out of our control, unfortunately.
And what will it allow us to do once we have it? Like, for people maybe that haven't, that maybe are not normally so active in Telegram or haven't been following so closely, why is this such a big deal for Dusk, and why will it make such a big impact?
Again, I think when you think about the variety of all the different things that you can do with blockchain, again, it's another how long is a piece of string type question. But let me point to two particular things I think that would be of interest. The first one, and the very clear one, is digital native issuance. I'm going to keep saying that, digital native issuance, right? So when we're currently using blockchain for tokenization, I don't mean we, I mean the market. So all these companies out there that offer tokenization systems. Ostensibly, this is a tokenized representation of an asset that already exists, right? The token is not the asset; it's a representation of the asset. But under the DLTR, you're talking about actual digital native issuance. The token is the asset. So holding the token means you hold the asset. There's no question mark there. There's no reconciliation needed. You own the token. That means that you own the asset because the token is the asset. And that's really huge for the market. The second big thing I would also mention is that it allows, in the case of the DLT TSS, which is the one that MPEX is applying for, MPEX will be able to operate as its own CSD for the assets which are trading on the MTF bot. They have to segregate those functions, of course, but they're basically clearing and settling their own transactions. In the current system, these transactions have to be sent to a third party CSD or a custodian or some other type of entity to be cleared and settled. And that's what adds in a lot of the time and a lot of the cost. This is where we get T+1, T+2. We can't really do instant settlement because you're relying on extra parties to get involved. It also adds cost because there are a lot of fees to pay. All that is gone with the DLT TSS. So MPEX will be able to, the assets will be there, they'll be on the MTF, they'll be traded, and then they'll be cleared and settled. And that's also really huge because that speeds up things to an almost instant clearing and settlement, which means taking advantage of all sorts of market opportunities that require, much higher frequency trading. And it also slashes fees, which makes it easier, obviously cheaper for MPEX to run it, but then those savings can be passed on to users as well, making it much more accessible to a wider range of people.
And what about if we look forwards a little bit, um, and sort of talk about, so one, let's just say in the future when we have that, what will that mean for, I mean, outside of MPEX? Like, are we looking to onboard institutions and companies outside of MPEX, or is that something that more MPEX will do? And we would be kind of like the internet when no one really knows, what they're using. It's just happening on top. Is there anything that you guys can say about that? Like what we can kind of expect in, I don't know, what would you say, maybe the next 2 to 5 years or something like that?
Interestingly, the answer to all your questions is yes. I'm not going to leave it there though, because I think that would be an unfair answer. All those things are possible. So let's talk about MPEX first. So MPEX is the trading facility. They are the ones with the license, so they are the ones with the exemption. We're a technology provider. So in terms of getting companies to come and start issuing assets, trading assets, right? This is MPEX's responsibility, right? This is not what we're doing. We're a technology company. We provide the financial market infrastructure for them to build it. We make it easier for them to onboard clients. So that's dealing with the MPEX issue. But like, could Dusk be in other DLT TSS applicants? Could it be inside other MTFs? Absolutely, of course it could. And there are a lot of companies out there that are also applying for this DLT TSS application, and there's absolutely no reason why they couldn't be using Dusk either exclusively or in addition to the DLT solutions that they're currently looking at. So I would say over the next 2 to 5 years, in addition to the MPEX thing really getting online and really starting to become an attractive proposition, you've also then got the possibility of us spreading into other license holders as well. And then we can start having some really interesting conversations then about whether these different DLT TSS holders can start talking to one another as well, like whether we can have sort of cross venue trading and things like that. And then I suppose if we want to get really adventurous, we can also point out finally, because there's a lot of talking about legislation today, is that they now have a new DLT sandbox that's been launched in the UK. Obviously, the UK, since Brexit, is not in the European Union anymore, so the DLTR doesn't apply there. But what the Brits have done is they've watched what the Europeans have been doing with the DLTR and have created a version which I think is actually a bit better. It's certainly, I won't go into the details why, but it seems to function a lot smoother. And so but technologically speaking, they're quite similar in terms of what needs to be provided to a license holder. So again, there's also no reason why Dusk couldn't be in the back end of some of those systems as well, which could potentially allow even, into European, British trading as well. So there's a lot of very exciting opportunities coming up.
What I heard there was Dusk will stop us being so separate from Europe after Brexit and being Brexit refugees. Um,
The Brexit bridge. Yeah, right.
yeah.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, well,
that sounds really.
it is interesting to look at it, and I say I won't go too much into the details, but they've ostensibly had like about a year or so, a year since it launched, 2 years since the draft legislation was passed, and I think you'll see this more and more going forward. Is the Brits will be watching what the Europeans do, and then okay, taking that and going, okay, these are the following problems we found with it, and we fixed those problems, and they release something better. But like then the reverse comes, right? Because then Europeans can look at what the Brits have done with their new version and go, hey, that's a really good idea. We could borrow that too. And so all this is great for us in the middle, us as Dusk, as technology providers, but all our users here as people who want these assets, who want to trade these assets, because this just makes a better regulatory environment for all of us.
I remember you saying something quite a while ago now, actually. I think it was around the time that I first joined, that the EU largely exports legislation. So if you can be, down with the EU legislation, it give you a head start in sort of any other jurisdiction.
Yeah, absolutely. That's very much true. So when you think about it in especially, I mean, we're obviously in a very digital field, being in, I mean, pretty hardcore in technology. Not all things are technology dependent, schools, bus systems, whatever. But there's a lot of things which are. And when something's digitally dependent, it crosses borders without any real effort whatsoever. So it's very valuable for large amounts of the world, large amounts of jurisdictions to line up their legislations of it. It's somewhat similar, at least. So, it just makes things a heck of a lot easier if things can be regulated the same way from country to country. It makes it easier for businesses to do business, to move into new markets, for users to operate in new markets. And thus, this leads to the situation where somebody has to be like the big daddy exporting regulation because it has to come from somewhere. If you're a small jurisdiction, a very small country, you may not have the resources to sit down and come up with a big piece of complicated legislation like a DLTR law. A lot easier just to take some other countries and copy it and change the names, like we used to do with our papers in university, right? And so the EU is a market of what, 455 million people. It has trillions and trillions of dollars in GDP. It's a very attractive market to look to for legislation. So too is the US. And so that's probably one of the big competitions out there in the world today is which set of legislation will be imitated. But for example, you've got regions like South America, which historically used to look to America for legislation, and indeed these days are kind of looking a little bit more towards the European Union for regulation because they think it's just better laid out, it's better worded, and it's a little bit more flexible than the American model, which often requires a lot of court actions and court cases to really refine what it's trying to say, whereas the European legislation is ready out of the box, right? It's ready-made legislation. So, yeah, it is fantastic advantage for Dusk to be in this jurisdiction and not in some other part of the world where we would be constantly running to catch up. We're actually ahead of the curve, which is really great.
And when we talk about partnerships, like I think one of the things that's a bit tricky with Dusk versus other more kind of crypto only projects is kind of the time that it takes for partnerships and for announcements and things like that. Like, I know that for marketing, we sort of want as much as we can to talk about, and quite often you guys sort of hype block us, like, no, 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 we can't talk about this yet. So can you maybe give people a bit of an understanding of what goes into these kinds of, I guess, game changing institutional partnerships that we're talking about to sort of be in a position where finance is taking place on Dusk and all of those transactions and everything like that is happening on Dusk. What is it normally like? Like how comes it takes, I guess, what would feel like a long time, or does it? Like maybe from an institutional perspective, the speed at which everything is moving is incredibly fast, and the kind of institutional guys are like, whoa, 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 slow down. And it's just that in crypto, we're kind of used to you do an AMA with somebody and that counts as a partnership. So would you maybe be able to share a bit more for the community about kind of what that timeline is, and maybe even how institutions kind of view Dusk. Like, are they kind of excited by what they hear? Are they considering other chains and we have some advantages, maybe some disadvantages? Yeah, kind of, can you give a bit of a sneak peek, I suppose, behind the kind of partnership process, both in terms of what goes into it and also how they're viewing things? Because obviously for us, we're like, yay, partnership. And for them, they're probably more like lawyers, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, good question. Very big question. So let's talk about why these sort of institutional partnerships seem to take a long time, I guess, compared to stuff in our industry. So as we know, a lot of us here, I think a lot of listeners here have had experience in working in smaller tech companies, perhaps in setting up their own ones. My background also from accelerators and startups and VC funded stuff. Stuff in that industry moves very fast. And a large part of it is driven by a simple rule is that these companies are all running out of money very quickly, right? When you're a startup, you've got 50K in the bank, maybe at most, and you know there's a definite date in the future when you're going to be out of money. So you have to get these partnerships pretty quickly. So you have a strong incentive to bend maybe and even to give a bit more than you're willing to give to the large companies on the other side of deals. And startups have a strong incentive to do business with each other, to maybe sometimes over exaggerate stuff, call things partnerships when they're not really partnerships. But when you're in the world of big business, it's a totally different situation altogether. These companies are very stable. They can take their time, and they move away from, I suppose, opportunity seeking to more like risk management focused approaches, risk reduction focused approaches. And so there's so many things that have to be taken into consideration. If you're a large company, you need to get buy-in from all the stakeholders, from all the shareholders. You need all the departments to sign off. Everybody needs to feel like there's a bit of a benefit. Everybody needs to be able to display this internally as a win for their department. So there's a lot of that too. And then there's legal processes. And then, so it's already a very long process. So even if you were approaching somebody like Nike or someone that doesn't really have very much to do with finance, it's already a very complicated process. And boring too. I'm not under any illusion here that people are very excited to hear about this. It's a lot of paperwork, a lot of presentations. But then when you add a finance element to it and you're talking about licenses, then there's a whole bunch of extra stuff comes in because now there's a lot of considerations, right? About things like, uh, you know, um, like, do we have to worry about what this might look like? Is this a threat to our license? Do we need to apply for extra exemptions? Will we get dragged before the regulators if, will even just announcing this partnership cause some kind of clash or whatever? So it's so much stuff. So it's just like you said, it's like a lot of talking with lawyers, whether it's us. So if we're approaching institutional partners, we're not really talking with their lawyers, of course, but they're talking with their lawyers between meetings of us. So that's a big part of the reason why these institutional partnerships take such a long time. You've got a lot of departments that need to get on board. They have to be extremely careful. And you can compare it to two blockchain companies doing a partnership, but there's a very different set of dynamics at play there, because when you're a large company with a lot of assets, with a lot of employees, with a lot of capital, you have a lot to lose. And so it moves away, I suppose, from opportunity seeking to risk reduction, which again, maybe not the most interesting words to talk about, but this explains why things are so slow at that level. Um, so then let's, so, sorry, I'm forgetting. What was the second part of your question, Jade?
Yeah, sorry, it was a really big question.
Okay.
The second part is kind of how institutions and partners slash potential partners seem to view Dusk. Like, what's the kind of vibe that you get from them, given that you guys are the ones having the meetings?
Yeah, sure. Oh, okay, that's a fair question. So I suppose there's a distinction between whether these companies are already somewhat convinced of the benefits of DLT or technology in general or not. There are plenty of institutions out there that, if anybody remembers back to some of the stuff around Y2K, right? There are a lot of jokes about the fact that the system was going to be brought down by a bank that has like a really old computer running Windows 3.11 sitting in a back room that's not been updated since 1987. And there's still a lot of institutions out there that operate like that. And so, so there is this issue of convincing them of the benefits of technology more broadly in DLT. But we see a lot of willingness in this space. I think this is less of an issue than it used to be, certainly quite a few years ago. But in terms of approaching them about this, so there is a lot of I suppose that some institutions do have some resistance to wondering certainly whether certain processes can be automated, lack of what they feel to be responsible people. There needs to be somebody there with a finger on a button. So these are all things that have to be gotten past. But the idea, the concept, the benefits that Dusk bring, I don't see, generally it's quite encouraging. People can understand, institutions can understand that if you can automate a lot of even just automating one of these processes that they have to do is already a gigantic cost saver when you multiply it across all the transactions. And they can understand that. And they can see the benefit of that. And this is why, we have a few different approaches to institutions depending on what it is that they're trying to achieve. So even the most cynical can understand the benefits of this stuff getting online. In terms of Dust themselves, they like it. They like the privacy element. That's obviously a big issue for them. Nobody wants a list of their customers' transactions to be posted on the internet somewhere. That would be a PR disaster. Like I said, risk reduction is very important. So this is something that they like. But, it's a sales process at the end of the day, and we have to be able to convince these partners that we are better than other blockchains, other DLTs in the market. Now, we have an infrastructure, a setup, which makes it fairly straightforward for us to convince them of why that's the case, but there is still a sales process involved. But so in general, I would say that you don't approach these partners from the perspective of, hey, wouldn't it be cool to use DLT? No, you approach it, as you should. This is what we can save you. This, whether it's money, whether it's time, these are the benefits for you, or this is a new opportunity that you can approach, and then start to sell them on that. Before going too much into the specifics of what the solution is. And then compared to other DLTs, it's really a matter of just hammering home what those differences are.
Thank you. I wanted to bring Luca in because this has been very institutional. And thank you, Ryan, for all of your answers. What would you say, Luca, kind of a similar question, but on your side, when you're speaking to more kind of, I suppose, crypto blockchain focused developers and projects, what's their general take on Dusk? What is the reception when you're having these kinds of conversations?
So the general reception is basically boils down to the fact that Dusk really thought through a lot of things when it comes to the tech stack. So for this specific use case of the native issuance and the clearing settlement of regulated financial assets. So when it comes to the crypto industry, there is in general a lot of naive thinking when it comes to the issuance of real world assets on chain, and the reason is that people in the industry, like in the blockchain space, are used to this very, I don't know, nice front ends and this kind of marketing pitches and saying let's bring the real estate on chain or this or that stock on chain and this kind of stuff. But in the whole industry, there isn't really a lot of understanding on what are the implications of doing that. So when I talk with a lot of other blockchain-related projects, then there is really a lot of effort when it comes to education, because differently from more traditional finance companies that actually know what are the implications of the applicable regulations. In the crypto space, there is kind of this thinking that when it comes to real world asset, it's just about the technical stuff. And then, of course, you're going to need to comply somehow legally, but it's kind of left up in the air. It's we're going to need to have a paper that says that we can do this or not. But there isn't really a lot of thinking about what are all the implications on the technology stack for you to comply with these regulations, which is what in general Ryan has been talking about previously. So what this boils down to is that usually there is a lot of education effort needed in order to like let people also understand that is not is not the representing a stock and adding smart contract behavior or fractionalization property. Is the real deal, but it's actually the native issuance of that asset that brings all the benefits, such as reduced friction, reduced costs, instant settlement, reduced of settlement failure. So like this is something that I, at least for me, was quite surprising, because even myself, like before joining Dusk, I've been working in the crypto space for quite a bit, and I previously, like I never really focused a lot on real world asset, but for example, it was like for me incredible, like the amount of knowledge that the Dusk has regarding this thing, and the fact that this knowledge has been used like to build the whole tech stack. And you can definitely tell when you actually talk with other companies that not so many people like really thought this through outside Dusk. And to be honest, I think Dusk is the one that really thought this through from the beginning to the end. So yeah, just to get back to your question, like the general perception I have is that there is a lot of education work still needed, like to let the crypto industry understand what is the difference between, for example, native issuance and tokenization, and this like this knowledge is gonna need to be mainstream sooner or later. But it's like now there is really some work on on making sure that people actually understand what this means. And also another feedback like, or another, like, say, sensation that I usually see, like from companies and organization in the crypto industry, is like kind of the surprise that Dusk took the route of like building everything from scratch. Because like in the open source world, like it's really easy to just reuse components that have been built by someone else. So like for now, it's very easy to just launch a layer 2 solution on top, on a EVM chain, or just use the Cosmos SDK to launch your own layer 1. But all these are kind of pre-baked solutions that, like, of course they can be useful, but like the effort that a team needs to do in order to go in production with this type of solutions is really not comparable at all with like all the effort and technological challenge that a team needs to do when it comes to building the whole tech stack from scratch, like from the virtual machine, from the consensus layer to like the propagation protocol, like all these components, like building them from scratch is a hustle that very few teams in the space do. And when like you talk with companies that need to I don't know, use Dusk, integrate Dusk, all this kind of stuff, like you really can see that they are genuinely surprised about the fact that there is still someone that it's is working on launching a specific technology that has been built in a way specifically to target some use cases. And also another thing, it's about the whole cryptographic research that has been done in the back office, let's say. So when like Dusk is kind of always been an underdog, let's say, in the sense that like when you actually talk with other organizations and they start understanding that, for example, like Dusk contributed to the introduction of the Poseidon hash function or other like cryptographic research, then like these organizations are usually kind of genuinely surprised and impressed also, because like work on the research side of things when it comes to innovating on cryptography and doing that for some specific use cases is really not something that like organizations usually do. They just fork Cosmos SDK or copy paste Ethereum rollup. Like, of course, there is also a lot of innovation, but that's usually not the mainstream way of launching your own product in the crypto space. You usually just copy paste, add some marketing, and maybe you fake some innovation, and that's it. But when it comes to really cryptographic research and scientific papers being published and those papers being used to implement things that are like now getting used by a lot of protocols in the ZK space, then that's quite impressive. So that's usually the perception I have, like when it comes to talking with other organizations and seeing how they react when I explain what Dusk is doing, how, why. So yeah.
Thank you. And kind of, I mean, based on that, would you see a future where once we have mainnet, other real world asset projects are wanting to be involved with Dusk? Like maybe they haven't quite thought through the kind of regulation and compliance side, and then suddenly for them to find that there is a blockchain that has would be not only beneficial but a bit of a lifesaver. Like, is that, maybe you can't answer that, but is that something that you think could be kind of realistic, that there would be a demand for that within the crypto space?
So I have my opinion on this, and we'll see how this will play out. But I do think that Dusk is uniquely positioned to be the backend infrastructure for real world assets compared to the tokenization front ends. So to answer your question, I do think that yes, like my opinion is that like all these tokenization platforms will sooner or later like need to face like to at least ask themselves, okay, what are we gonna use to do the settlement? Since are we gonna take a license ourselves? Are we gonna use CSD or these TradFi custodials, or are we gonna use blockchain-based solutions out of the box? And so, like in my mind, like these are the three main scenarios. And at the end of the day, like if you're a tokenization platform, then you usually want to like what I see is usually a lot of work on making the user experience great, having a very nice front end and all this kind of stuff. So everything that is related to the final user that wants to, I don't know, like sell pennies of a Tesla stock in a, I don't know, automatized way based on some smart contract logic or whatever. But all these type of things, like it's like if you don't have all the type of legal compliance that Ryan was teaching us about, then you're just doing that on a synthetic asset, and so as a tokenization platform, like you're gonna need to make a choice on where to do the settlement, and if your choice is either to get a license yourself, that could be a lot of overhead, just for all the reason that Ryan was talking about. If you use a traditional finance custodial, then that's kind of a bit I don't know, like it's kind of half of the solution, right? Like you are it's a bit yeah, it's you're pitching the full Web3 solution, but in reality, like you are still relying on a backbone of traditional finance. And so like in my mind, why these tokenization platforms shouldn't use Dusk as the settlement layer for securities, especially in all these concepts of the modularized or modular blockchain architecture, all this kind of stuff. Like there is a lot of understanding now in the whole industry that a lot of pieces of the tech stack can be kept modular. So like, for example, you talk a lot, like now in the crypto space, there is a lot of conversation about data availability layer and settlement layer, execution layer, all this kind of stuff. is picking off, like from a design perspective and narrative perspective. And I don't see why this shouldn't be the case also when it comes to real world assets. So like why you should have the tokenization itself made on the settlement layer of the security. If Dusk took this specific decision for the tech stack to build it from scratch, to do some cryptographic research, to make sure that all the applicable regulations for the issuance and trading of securities is compliant, like with the technology, then like why a tokenization platform should try to be a competitor in that specific niche compared to just providing a very nice front end and have a huge user base. So yeah, to summarize, I think there's going to be interesting years because I think that Dusk is not a competitor to like most of these platforms, but is instead a technology providers to these user-facing platforms. So I think there's going to be a reality check sooner or later and kind of a reconciliation on the expectation of what every product can do in this bigger picture, let's say.
Thank you. And this was kind of a question that I had, but I also see that a few people have asked, I suppose, similar kind of things. But I'd love to hear from both of you on what are the kind of, I guess, post-mainnet adoption plans, like whether it's onboarding new projects within the crypto space, whether it's outreach that might begin with institutions or has already begun. What are you guys kind of envisioning, I suppose, over the next year or so in terms of post-mainnet adoption and outreach, whether that's the grant program? Yeah, if you could say a little bit more about that.
Yeah, I can start. So there's gonna be definitely an effort to onboard more developers to Dusk, because once mainnet is shipped and we finalize the polishing the developer tools, then there is really nothing that prevents a developer to deploy smart contracts on Dusk, leveraging all the features that Dusk offers. And so like there's gonna be an effort in basically onboarding new developers, and this can take the form of different activities, like since education based activities, but also like to hackathons themselves. So there's going to be a big push for like onboarding all the companies that have a specific use case that wouldn't be really achieved with the technology that has been circulating until now. So there's going to be all this work of making sure that the developer experience is fully streamlined from the education phase on understanding like what is Dusk and like why should you care and how can you deploy your smart contract, making sure to take all the relevant features that Dusk provides to actually tackle some use cases that wouldn't be possible before, just because like there wasn't the technology to do that. So yeah, that's gonna be a big push. Plus, I would say all the side of things where you actually need to get these tokenization platforms educated about like what's the deal with real world asset, and making sure that they can leverage Dusk as the settlement layer for security. So I think there's gonna be a lot of effort on like making sure that Dusk is not only positioned to be the settlement layer, because this is already it is like that, but also that companies are aware about all the legal overhead and technical overhead that they need to incur in order to do this thing themselves. So there's going to be a lot of effort in making sure that like Dusk can be the technology provider of a lot of companies that may perceive us as a competitor, but in reality, we are just a complementary solution that is taking care of all the really tough things, like from the cryptographic research to the regulatory compliance, to make sure that, for example, other companies can do the front end nice things, like and still create their products, but relying on a solid infrastructure that is the one that Dusk provides.
Sure. So I guess I can't to add an awful lot to what Luca said. I think that's a very good explanation of where we're at. I think it probably makes sense to just be a little bit more clear to provide a sort of an overall framework for what the timeline is in terms of groups of activities. And a lot of what Luca said there, so potentially providing maybe clearing and settlement solutions for some of the companies out there, for having maybe hackathons, for being at conferences, educating people, getting people to come and build, educating developers, getting people to come and build on Dusk. This is all sort of, I suppose, we would call this, I guess, short-term work. That doesn't mean that it's necessarily going to be finished very quickly, but rather that there's no real, legislative or building barriers to a lot of this. This is stuff that we can start doing immediately. So I consider all this work to be stuff that we'd be doing over the short term. And then over the medium term is this thing which Emma has discussed a few times, I think, in the Telegram, called the hybrid model, which is it's institutional focused. But it does not require a separate license, unlike the DLTR. So it's not quite as free as the DLTR, obviously, otherwise it would require this license exemption kind of thing. But because it doesn't require any real legal there's not really anything to do legally other than to make sure that the regulators are okay with it, which is more like getting a nod from them rather than getting any piece of paper from them. But it does take time to build the components necessary for this. So that's why I put that in the medium term category. And those are a certain type of institutions that need to be spoken to in order to bring them into this model. And then the DLTR, the DLT-TSS, which we spoke a lot about today, is more over the long term, just purely because that application takes a little bit longer, and also because the sales cycle for bringing people into that also takes a bit longer too. Of course, it doesn't mean that this work is all going on at the same time. Of course, it's just more that I think what you will probably start to see and hear news about these activities, such as onboarding developers, educating the community, providing solutions in the tokenization space. This is going to be coming sooner, and then the stuff related to the hybrid model comes out over a more medium time frame, and DLTR over a longer term time frame. Again, this is just, I think it's useful for the community to understand a little bit about how we think of the work. All these things are going on simultaneously, but that's what I think you would expect to see in terms of announcements and news. I hope that's helpful to everyone.
Yeah, definitely. Short term, medium term, and long term.
Yeah.
It is great to get a sense of all three, I think. I'm just looking at the questions here, and I'm trying not to just read them word for word because I think that some of it's been answered already. I guess, there's a question here: how do you foresee the market evolving, and what is the strategy to stay ahead? I feel like in some ways you guys have kind of answered that, in the sense of as more and more people become aware of what is necessary, they'll see kind of how Dusk is useful for their plans as well. But is there anything else that you would add to that? Any predictions for the future of the market and how Dusk can fit into that and stay ahead?
Yes, it's tough to say, but there is definitely a reality check that started. So we would hear about tokenization already in 2017, and now it's just it's called real world assets, but there hasn't been really a lot of stuff going on there, right? Even if these topics have been in the mouth of everybody in the blockchain space for a while. So I do think that now, little by little, there is always a stronger reality check on understanding what are the difficulties about providing a fully fledged solution for tokenizing assets and especially securities, and actually understanding that there is way more things to consider other than the technology, and that for some specific thing, like the technology that has been built for a different purpose may not be necessarily suited for another purpose. So yeah, like from my side, I'm really curious to see like what's gonna be like that people will perceive in the coming years about what is required to tokenize a stock and to issue it natively, and to understand if like there is gonna be more awareness about like what are the difference between these activities. So this is the main thing I'm looking for, because like the narrative changes and like expectation changes too, and like I guess you just need to wait until seeing like what are the organizations that are for the short term, just trying to hype a product and cash out, and what are the others that like, build the whole tech stack for a specific business case and are actually have a plan of invoicing to companies because they are actually providing a product that other companies need, compared to just words or funky things. So I'm definitely curious about these things for sure. Like the increase of awareness about what it takes to have a stock on chain and issue it natively, and see like what's going to be the awareness about what is the implication of that, and the condition to do so. See.
Yeah, definitely. I
Sorry.
will only tag on just the need. I think what Dusk has been very good at so far, if we can toot our own horn a little bit, is staying ahead on the legislation stuff. Obviously, that's what you would expect to come out of me because that's a big part of my job. But I think that we've been ahead of the game when it comes to seeing MICA coming, to seeing the DLTR coming, to seeing all these different things coming. And we will continue to stay on top of that. Like I say, we're now looking at this UK legislation as well. And that's very important because this is important to understand. This is an evolving situation. And the European Union is trying to figure out where it stands on all this. Does it like DLT? It seems to. Certainly, it seems to like cost savings. It has to compete against bigger markets, the US, bigger volumes like out of China as well. And so they have to build a regulatory regime that is attractive. They need to attract talent. So they're trying to figure out where they land on all this stuff. It's an evolving conversation. A lot of these things are either pilots or they're sandboxes, and we just need to stay constantly informed. I think we're pretty good at that. And if we stay ahead and we have conversations with the regulators, which is also something that we do as well, to give them information that they need, and to help them to make the right decisions. And I think that puts us in a very good conversation. So active reading and active speaking and active engagement with regulators as and when necessary.
Awesome. And maybe this is more of a Luca question, but potentially both of you. Is there any update around the grant program? Is there anything that we can share about that? I mean, it's still ongoing. But yeah, is there anything that we can share about that, or is it, all protected?
Yeah, for sure. So yeah, it's been ongoing for quite a while, and like we welcome applications of all sorts. We do focus on right now, like the applications that either tackle some infrastructural, not challenges, but things that we actually need, or some specific use cases that basically highlight the power of Dusk. So these are the main two things we are looking for, and so we have received quite quite a number of applications. Just that the ones that we are really prioritizing, looking for, are the ones that either tackle some technological infrastructural need that we have, like, let's say separating like the logic of the archiver node so that it's easier for clients like to consume the information of the chain, or for example like specific integrations such as hardware wallets, or very specific use cases that are that marry a lot with what Dusk is doing. So yeah, these are the things that we prioritize most, and it's cool to see that we had quite some solid grants submission. So yeah, like I'm really curious to see like how the launch of mainnet is gonna also affect like the number of proposals incoming, and yeah, so that's mostly it.
Great, thank you. I think the questions here about financials are actually probably more for Emanuele Carboni. I don't think that you guys would be able to answer those. So then the final one, and we will be doing an AMA with him probably, I want to say next week, maybe the week after, as part of this, kind of more people in the team sharing. So we can put those questions to him at a more appropriate time. The final question that I see here that I'm not sure how much you guys would be able to say on it, but about the MPEX implementation. It says, what milestones have been achieved so far in the partnership with MPEX, and what are the next steps? Maybe Ryan, this might be more for you, but what can be shared about that? I know that we recently hired a couple more engineers who are working on that. So, I mean, it sounds like it's going pretty well. But yeah, is there anything else you can share beyond it's going quite well?
Yeah, it is one of those frustrating things where obviously due to confidentiality, we're not allowed to share too much. But I suppose what I can share is I can say that it's very much on track with the timeline that we expected, which I guess is very good news. The system that we're building for MPEX is now fully functional in terms of how it operates. There's a few things that still need to be plugged together. But yeah, it looks very nice, and we brought on two, as people saw the announcement recently, we brought on two new devs. That was actually a little while ago now. They've been onboarded for quite some time and have been able to really speed up this implementation. And yeah, I know this is all very vague, I suppose, but what I would say is that we're extremely happy with the progress. We're extremely happy with what it looks like. NPEX, which is our client in this situation, is also very happy with how it looks and how it works. It's accessible for them. It fits with their existing systems, and everything remains on track. So I would say that, yeah, we're in a very good position. That's pretty much as I can say, but it's all very positive.
Thank you, everybody, for your time. This should have recorded, and I'll make it available as soon as possible. Thank you, Luca. Thank you, Ryan. Thank you to everyone who listened and for all the questions. I hope that this is useful and that you guys are enjoying hearing from different people within the team than our kind of famous faces. And we will have more of these. I think Emanuele Carboni is likely to be the next one, like I said, in probably a week or so. And yeah, we'll keep doing these. We'll keep sending out the daily reports on nocturne updates and things. I'm glad you all enjoyed it. And yeah, we'll do more, and we will see you here, Telegram, Twitter, all the places. So yeah, thank you very much.